Thank you for that great introduction, not entirely true. It's wonderful to see so many people of you here. I started my career in movies wanting to be a genetic engineer. I was doing math and science A-levels, and my first university interview, there were two professors in the room who sat in front of a huge plate glass window with the sun streaming through, burning into my eyes, casting them as dark, shadowy figures like something out of Stanley Kubrick's Dr. Strangelove. And one of these dark figures said, "And why do you want to be a genetic engineer?" And I said, "Well, I'd like to find a way to cure the world of genetic diseases like hemophilia and cystic fibrosis." Thought it was a pretty good answer. One of them chuckled and said, "If you don't mind me saying, you're awfully naive." Actually, I did mind. I was 17. I hadn't even done my A-levels. I had a dream. I had an ambition. I thought that was a pretty good start. So I told them what I thought. I said, "You know what? I do mind." Well, I got my place. I took a gap year, and in that year, I had several jobs. I saved up some money, and I went off to live in Paris. And in between working in a T-shirt shop, I saw a lot of movies. Paris was filled with small cinemas that you could go into any time of the day and watch old Hollywood classics, art house movies, independent films. It was pure bliss. I saw as many of those movies as I could. I loved it. I came back to London. I got a job in an independent cinema tearing tickets. You could sit at the back of the cinema and watch the movies once the tickets were torn. So I felt, I love the theater, I love movies. I knew a lot about thermoregulation of the lizard and the double helix structure of DNA, but I really wanted to study the arts. I took my place up at university and started my campaign to move from the science block about 100 yards away to the arts block. It was a real battle. You're not qualified, you've got science A-levels, you can't come here. Finally, I managed to convince them that I was far too young to be labeled and excluded. I left university. No, these two experiences, my interview and swapping from a science to an arts degree, were seminal. They taught me the power of not knowing and also of challenging the system. My first memory of going to the movies was to see the 1944 film National Velvet at the Bedford Playhouse in New York, where I lived at the time. I was about 7 years old, and I was blown away. Here was a 12-year-old Judy Garland who cross-dresses as a male jockey, rides her horse Pie, and wins the Grand National. For a 7-year-old girl who already had aspirations of making it in a man's world, this was really something else. Another heroine of mine was Judy Garland in The Wizard of Oz, playing Dorothy Gale. She goes through Oz trying to find her way home, taking the straw man, the tin man, and the lion with her with such courage and such determination. This movie was almost too scary and too magnificent to watch. It was made in 1939. It was incredibly troubled production. When it was first released by MGM, it didn't make its money back. But it was re-released again in 1946 and 1956 and has gone on to become the world's most watched movie. Who would have known? One of the most harrowing movie experiences I had was when I was about 8 years old. On a Wednesday, my mother would come home from work and she would switch on the TV and she would watch what was called the late afternoon movie show. I watched over her shoulder a movie I now know was called Imitation of Life, made in 1959 by a seminal director called Douglas Sirk. It was a story of, sorry, it's a dark clip, but it was a story of a young girl called Sarah Jane, whose mother, Annie, played by Juanita Moore, that you can just about see reflected in the mirror, was a black maid working for a famous Hollywood actress called Deborah Kerr. In a segregated world, the light-skinned Sarah passes for white. In a country that rejected her race, she reviles and rejects her black mother, runs away from home, and finds a job in a nightclub. The final scene of this movie is one of the most painful and powerful scenes I've ever seen in a film. I just stood there, an 8-year-old girl, in the doorway, and just wept. Tears rolled down my cheeks. This was a film that spoke to a kid, me, who was living in a country that's struggling with civil rights. The movie made me understand that much more what segregation and racism meant. I have so many examples of films that got to me. Oops, not that one first. Oh, I haven't got this clip. I was going to say, there's Liza Minnelli and Joel Grey in a film called Cabaret, which charted the final halcyon days of the Weimar Republic, destroyed by the rise of the Nazi Party. This is a picture of Meryl Streep in one of her early films with Robert De Niro called The Deer Hunter, a film about the devastating effects of the Vietnam War on a small industrial community in America. I was a kid who grew up in America during the Vietnam War, so when I finished watching this film, I just couldn't move from my seat. I was completely sort of gripped by it, you know, and torn apart by it. Here's Robert De Niro again playing Jake LaMotta in Martin Scorsese's film Raging Bull. Jake LaMotta was a real-life boxer whose deep animal rage gets him to the top of the ring but destroys everything in his life outside. You can watch the boxing scenes in this movie alone and be completely mesmerized. They're absolutely balletic. They're beautifully, beautifully shot by Martin Scorsese. All these movies had a profound effect on me. They gave women and the dispossessed a voice. They explored the politics of race, of war, of violence, of love and hate, despair and joy. There was also the sheer pleasure of seeing a brilliant comedy and coming out on a high. So here I was, with an arts degree and a passion for movies. But how to get started? What did it mean to say I want to work in movies? I left university at the height of the Thatcher era. 3 million unemployed, a lot of anger, not a lot of hope. I decided to go back to New York. I got back there, I slept on some sofas, I had a series of pretty dull jobs, and then I had some luck. I met someone who knew someone who was working on a movie. It was written by some guy who was filming it in his apartment, and he'd raised the money himself. They needed help. There was no pay, but it was a start, and I could support myself doing proofreading jobs, waitressing, working in shops. I went uptown and into that apartment and walked onto my first movie set. Magic. I started on that film by making sandwiches for the crew, and ended up being taught how to edit by the director, Bill Sherwood. I knew nothing, but was ready to learn everything. That movie was called Parting Glances. It was written, produced, and the money raised by Bill. He shot it almost entirely in his flat on a shoestring budget. Bill had never shot a movie before. The movie he made would never have been made by a studio. It defied all the rules about what people supposedly wanted to see in the cinema. And yet it went on to become a worldwide success when it was released in 1986. It was the first movie that presented in a witty, realistic, and detailed way the lives of ordinary gay city dwellers in Manhattan. It was also the first movie to deal with AIDS, which was a relatively new disease then, and the devastating effects it had on the community. And guess what? You might know from looking at this poster that it was Steve Buscemi's first film. I don't know if you guys know Steve Buscemi from Boardwalk Empire and all the other movies, but that was his first film. He played Nick, the ex-boyfriend who was HIV positive. It was funny, it had heart, and people went to see it. What Bill Sherwood did is what so many filmmakers did at the start of their careers. They made movies their way because they didn't know any other way. Their naivety was one of their greatest assets. If they had asked anyone in the Hollywood studio system if their idea was viable, or if they'd fund their script, they would have had a resounding no. Today, you have the benefit of technology. You can make a movie on your mobile phone. You've all heard about the huge success of Blair Witch Project and the first Paranormal Activity, all of which were made on a shoestring budget, practically no money, and shot digitally and went on to have resounding success. But one thing you have to remember is that ideas are cheap and plentiful. The real challenge is making those ideas happen, building them into something. Making it in the movie business requires talent, drive, ambition, initiative, persistence, and luck. A lot of people have talent, and a lot of people have luck. What makes you stand out is drive, persistence, and ambition. When you're told you're naive, when you're told you can't do something because that's not the way it's done, turn it round. Go ahead, do it. After all, what's the worst that can happen? You fail, and you try again. Take the negatives as a challenge and turn them into something positive to spur you on. I'm a film producer. When I walked onto the set of Parting Glances, I knew pretty quickly that that was what I wanted to do. A producer works from the ground up on a project, building it from the very beginning. What I do is I find the book, the newspaper article, the radio program, the real-life story, and I turn it into a film. I find the script writer to write the screenplay, hire the director, raise the finance, and see the movie all the way from its inception as a screenplay to distribution in the cinemas. It's a thrilling, frustrating, rewarding, sometimes exhausting and exasperating job, but it enables you to work with hugely talented, creative, and dynamic people. It truly is a collaborative process, and I love that about it. The Oscar-winning scriptwriter William Goldman wrote as the first sentence of his seminal book, Adventures in the Screen Trade, "Nobody knows anything." How audacious was that? A whole bunch of we know everythings at the top of the pile being exposed by one of the most successful scriptwriters of all time. But you know what? It's true. I can give you so many examples in my business of people not knowing. They think they know, but they don't know. One of the most recent examples is Slumdog Millionaire. So that film was shot, completely finished, in the can, done. The producer took it over to Hollywood, showed it to the executives who'd part-funded it. The guys watch the movie, it finishes, and they say, straight to DVD. There is no way we can release this movie. I mean, who's going to go see a film that's 95% in Hindi and stars nobodies? Forget about it. They pleaded for a 24-hour stay of execution, took it to another distributor, sold the movie to them, and the rest is history. 8 Oscars of history. So these stories happen over and over again. You have to have the courage of your convictions. Stand by your ideas. Turn them into something more than ideas. Movie making isn't a science. There's not a precise set of governing rules or principles, no matter what anyone would have you believe. There is no proper way to get into movies. Danny Boyle, who made Slumdog, started out in the theater. Lynn Ramsey, who made We Need to Talk About Kevin, started out in Glasgow as a photographer. Shane Meadows, who did This Is England, he just made his own movie. It was a short film that he wrote, directed, shot. He won a short film competition and went on to have a really fantastic career. Me, I started making sandwiches on Parting Glances. I knew nothing, but I'd seen a lot of films and wanted to work hard. I've since produced about 15 movies. The Crying Game I worked on with my partner, Stephen Woolley, was a film that nobody wanted to fund, absolutely nobody. It went on to win 6 Oscar nominations and an Oscar for Best Screenplay and broke box office records. I went on to make other films, The Little Voice. There's Michael Caine channeling Sid Vicious, singing My Way. Maggie Smith and Judi Dench in Ladies in Lavender, which was one of the first movies to show that there was an audience for over 50-year-olds who would go to the cinema. Made in Dagenham, which explored the fight for equal pay by a real group of women who worked at the Ford Dagenham factory in the East End of London. And then the most recent, Helena Bonham Carter playing Miss Havisham in Great Expectations. Some of the movies I've made have worked, and some of them haven't, but I'm really proud of them all. And what I'm most proud of the career that I've built is that it's given me voice and the power to help make change. A couple of months ago, I was asked if I could donate some film prizes for a fundraiser. The night was a huge success. We raised tens of thousands of pounds to go towards the cure for cystic fibrosis. So, you see, the most unlikely course of events have a way of making sense in the end. I've told you about the films that have affected me and shaped me, but you'll have your own favorite films, your own films that have made you laugh, made you cry, inspired you, and you'll have your own stories to tell. I'm going to leave you with a piece of dialogue from Skyfall. Oh God, you can hardly read it, I'm really sorry. Anyway, this is a clip. It's an exchange between Q and Bond, which I love, because it's basically Q putting Bond in his place and making Bond know that he is the next generation. And really, that's what I'm saying to you. You're going to be taking me over and putting me in the dark as soon as you get onto that career ladder, and I can't wait for that to happen. Thanks. Thank you.